Welcome to another episode of Startup Rights, a special one today because I have my friend Jimmy on on the podcast, and we met. We actually started talking. I mean, before Pigment, but we officially met at Pigment. But Jimmy now is founding deployment strategies at Scope AI, a very exciting startup. We're gonna talk more. We have some questions lined up, but Jimmy has a very interesting background. And I feel like I will not do justice to it. So I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself in your own words, Jimmy. The stage is yours.
Sweet. Well, thanks for having me, Javid. I've been looking forward to this, and it's an honor to be on your podcast. It's something that stood out to me when I first stalked your LinkedIn when I saw you applying to Pigment. So it's nice, a little full circle moment. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, quick intro. I've got a bit of a confusing background, so I'll try to summarize it. Um, Chinese ancestry, right? My parents are from China. I was born and raised in Germany, although I have lost that accent by now. Since the age of 14, I've been living in the UK. So I originally came here for a year abroad, tried to learn English because it looks good on your CV. Things kind of got out of hand, and I did my GCSEs and A levels here. Then I got into Cambridge, so I couldn't say no to that. Studied natural sciences there with a focus on pharmacology. Then my career as well is a bit all over the place. So I started in pharmaceutical consulting with a company called ZS. After 4.5 years there, I joined Pigment, where I met you, as a business development representative, right? Cold calling, you know the drill. And yeah, next Friday is going to be my first day at Scope, the exciting AI startup.
Jimmy, one of the ways where we intersect in backwards, obviously, we both studied biologically related sciences in our undergrad. And as you went into consulting, also one of the cool things about Jimmy Ju is also a fantastic photographer. You guys need to check his videos and YouTube channel out. But one of the interesting things is you made obviously a lot of high achievers, people who go to Oxbridge and other schools, the kind of go-to destinations after school tend to be either finance or consulting, or maybe tech, but usually finance and consulting kind of, and then they decide to move in other directions. You also started your career in consulting, but you made the decision to transition away from that path and actually kind of, go into the startup world. And I'm curious, what was the decision? What was the reasoning behind that decision?
Mm-hmm. I think I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, right? I liked science, but I didn't like it enough to pursue a PhD. I also liked business, but not quite enough to go into investment banking. Corporate law I wrote off just because uh, didn't really see myself thriving in law. So I kind of chose consulting not because it was like a lifelong dream of mine. Frankly, I didn't even know what consulting was in like second year. I think I kind of had to figure out why businesses would ever pay you like six figures to tell them how to do their job. So I kind of treated it as okay, let's find a job that will provide you broad exit opportunities. And based on how consulting was pitched to me, and I ultimately agree with this, it just arms you with that skill set, a corporate skill set of, they call it unstructured problem solving, which doesn't really mean that much unless you actually kind of have been through it and you realize, oh, this is actually quite a useful skill set. So I was always kind of going into it knowing that one day I will either pivot into pharma or something else. And the decision to pivot into Pigment, it was not a planned move, to be honest. Pigment reached out because they were looking for a German speaker. So one day I just got a call being like, hey, do you want to sell like AI financial planning solutions to German like CFOs? And I was like, no. But then I realized actually, let's do an interview. Let's just like stay sharp, because I think it's always good to do a couple of interviews every year to not just be aware of what's out there, but also just as practice. And throughout the interview process, when I actually realized what even is this thing that they're selling, because AI was quite like, I knew it was obviously the next big thing, but I didn't really know much else about it. I realized that the business needs that Pigment was solving were exactly the sort of conclusions or main areas of opportunity that we kept identifying on our consulting projects. Every client, no matter how big they are, we're talking like $1 trillion companies that are curing cancer. Sometimes because that one person who has access to that Excel sheet is like out of office, your whole like forecast is just bricked or on hold until they're back, right? Sometimes you have like really senior pharma stakeholders asking, oh, is this like V0.7 or 0.8? Like, which one's the latest numbers? And whenever we encountered it, it was just kind of like, all right, yeah, you've got data silos. This is a problem. You'll get to it at some point. It's something that you kind of kick down the road just continuously. So I realized, when I read through what Pigment does and the problems that it solves, which is exactly these problems, faster planning, breaking down data silos, I thought, actually, you know what, this product is quite interesting. Maybe it's got legs. And also, the second main reason was that I just wanted to try out sales.
There are a lot of people that are in your position now with the information you have, with the knowledge of kind of the hindsight, right? Do you think you would still pursue consulting as in the startup path, or do you think you would do things a bit differently?
No, I wouldn't do anything different. I enjoyed my time in consulting. It was very hard, don't get me wrong. I think everything that you hear about consulting is true, right? You've got a lot of hectic deadlines, late working hours, depending on the firm, a lot of travel and a lot of pressure. But ultimately, it's that whole forged in the fire sort of idea, right? Or diamonds are formed under pressure, like you like to say. I think that once I left consulting and I was used to like a certain level of execution, be it slide decks, be it presenting or speaking to senior stakeholders, then entering maybe a field where not everyone has that consulting background, it felt like almost like an unfair advantage, or like I was doping, because a lot of things that maybe would cause or would create barriers for someone fresh out of uni, let's say starting a BDR position, were not that difficult for me as a result.
Now, you're obviously a bit more experienced, not in terms of like the work itself, but also like understanding startups, understanding kind of career progression and stuff. And there's a lot of startups out there at different stages for different roles. When thinking about what startup to join, and you mentioned a couple of them for Pigment, the reasons that made you convinced that Pigment was the right choice. What factors do you think people should consider?
Let's say from a career point of view, right? I think you should really, I don't want to discourage anyone from joining a startup fresh out of university. I think it's a really good opportunity. You can learn a lot of things, but don't be fooled by like the startup dream, right? There's a lot of stuff that comes with it. So you want to make sure you're making the right decision. Also late hours, less job security, right? If the startup fails, then you're just jobless. There's nothing you can do. I think that starting at a bigger enterprise or starting in consulting and sort of learning all of those skill sets and the sort of corporate processes is helpful. You don't have to spend 5 years or 4.5 years like I did, but just a couple just to get your reps in. I think when you're selecting a startup as well, you need to consider, let's say, three main things: the product and how promising you think the product is. So you have to look into the industry, what problems are they solving, and is this actually something that people will spend money on? The second one would be your risk appetite at this point in life and your career. So for me, I don't have kids yet. I haven't got a mortgage. So even if they're coming in the next 3 to 5 years, this is maybe the last time where I'm able to take that dive. So even if after a year, scope, and I'm knock wood, this doesn't happen, but in the worst case scenario of them just going bankrupt, I'll be fine. I'll probably pivot back to a previous employer, but I'm not losing any sleep over unpaid bills, right? So product, risk appetite. And the third one, I think it's just a team. When you're choosing a company, let's say a big consulting firm with 10,000 people, the culture is, I don't want to say irrelevant. Obviously, that's going to be a factor. But in 10,000 people, like, you're going to find at least a group of 5 people that you get on with, right? You'll find some mates and have a good time. But when it's a startup, and let's say you're like the first or second person with that job description, and you realize, oh, the founders are like a certain kind of personality, whether or not you gel with them, whether or not you think they operate in good faith, those are all things that should be part of your mental checklist as well.
Very good point. And you briefly mentioned it, but I want you to elaborate that. You said there are some similarities when you transition, not similarities, but there are certain skills that you're already very familiar when you transition from consulting to sales. It made it easier. But there are also, sales is quite different than consulting in many ways too. There are challenging aspects of it too, right? What was very different from your time in consulting?
I'd say there's two that jump to mind. One is specific to maybe going down a size. So I went from a company from 15,000 to 500. And the second point will just be the difference between consulting and sales. So on the first one, going from big enterprise to sort of, I wouldn't call Pigment a startup, right? We've got 500 people. I would say it's medium
Scale
level.
up.
Scale up, exactly. But considerably smaller than 15,000. In a company like that, and it seems obvious in hindsight, but it kind of stumped me at the start. The standard operating procedures or standardized practices don't exist yet, or they're still being formalized. So you can't sort of go in with the mindset being like, hey, what's the like proven best way to do this? Or what's the best system, of achieving your targets or whatever. It's kind of on you to figure that out. And especially if you go to like another stage, let's say 12 people, like I am with Scope, there's going to be even less certainty and even more sort of agency that you have to take yourself to figure out these things and these best practices. The second point, around consulting and sales, and this was part of my like conscious decision in pivoting out of consulting. I was feeling like I was getting a little bit too comfortable with the fact that people, like clients, were paying, six figures, 500,000 to speak to us, right? So when a senior pharma stakeholder jumps on a call, he's obviously going to come with a certain level of enthusiasm and like curiosity, what we have to say, because they paid a lot of money for us, right? Whereas in sales, especially like an outbound BDR role, you're the person cold calling. You're literally calling someone who doesn't want to talk to you, who's probably thinking, who the hell is this and how did they find my number? And then you're trying to extract six figures from them. That's a very different game that you're playing. And I realized that that was a fundamental difference, not a skill that I had the chance to develop yet in consulting. And I feel like maybe especially Oxbridge people sometimes underestimate the power of sales, right? Like you said at the start, it's usually investment banking, corporate law, or consulting that people go into. Sales is almost seen as I don't want to go as far as saying undesirable, but from a, let's say, intellectually challenging standpoint, maybe people just think, oh, you just have to be charismatic and talk good. But really, that's quite important. Every conversation you have in your career, every job interview you have, every fundraising round or conversation with venture capital firms, that's basically a sales conversation. So if you have that skill on lockdown, you'll be very successful.
It's a very good point. I mean, to be very honest, if you're a founder, if you're a startup person, there are really two, if you narrow it down, and I'm not talking about like once you become like a huge startup, I'm talking about like the early days. You have two roles essentially. One is whoever makes a product, the CTO, whoever, and the other one who sells the product, whether it's to VCs or to customers. So there's nothing else. You either have to be good at sales or at tech. You're right. You're very much right. And I feel like people underestimate the BDR role, as you mentioned. It's actually the front kind of line of startups go to market strategy, right? And there's a lot that goes into that. I have a few questions to ask you about the role itself. But very quickly, I'm curious, like, what does that experience teach you um, about how customers actually think and buy?
I think that one important lesson when you exit the bubble of consulting where everyone's already listening to you is that you have to earn their attention first, right? And that's a whole skill that we can talk about in terms of the art of cold calling, right? How to earn the extra 10 seconds. And the second one is about how non-rational a sales or purchasing decision can be. So what I mean by that is, as much as we like to think that we're making purchasing decisions using our brain, it's a lot more emotional than we might think. And being able to, in the least psychopathic way possible, being able to navigate these emotional levers, right? And sort of engineer your conversation in a way that makes them realize that you can actually provide a lot of value to them or maybe solve a problem that's keeping them up at night. Even if the content is the same, depending on your conversational approach, you might get hung up on or you might close a deal.
Very true. And one thing I noticed in sales, there's such a diversity in the way people approach to sales. Yeah. You might have like five people and five of them are doing completely different things, but getting good results still, right? And I'm sure you've seen those approaches yourself too. In your opinion, what makes a good salesperson? and how do you keep improving over time?
I've definitely seen, different kinds of people, right? I think we've moved away from the stereotypical salesperson. If you think about salesperson, you're probably thinking of like a sleazy car salesman, right? Like just kind of talking at you, maybe
Wolf
not
of Wall Street
entirely
kind
true.
of.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
All that, which is just low-key scamming people. But I think that stereotype doesn't necessarily translate to success in like the real world when you're actually outbound sales. I think that this the stereotype of, okay, someone picks up the phone or you get to pitch, right? If we look at the talk ratio, if you're doing most of the talking and the customer's just kind of listening to you, people might think that that's what sales is, but it really won't make you a successful salesperson. I think the best salespeople that I've come across are active listeners. They're very good at listening. If anything, they will be able to, with a few questions, get you to just spill your heart out, like just tell you all of your pain points, everything that they're struggling with, like all of those things. And then just by sort of asking the right questions, listening, and sort of digging a bit deeper, uncovering those pains, they're able to then go, actually, at the end of the call, maybe in the second half, actually, I think I might be able to help you, right? They don't jump right into the pitch. But that's just the conversational side. And you also have people who are excellent at writing emails or doing LinkedIn outreach, which is less my style, but also works for some people.
It is not about just booking meetings, right? I mean, there's a whole strategy behind. And as you said, I feel like it's very much simplified. And like, oh, you pick up, you dial, but you're talking to very experienced, knowledgeable people. You have to understand their fields, their sector a bit. You have to understand your product a bit, and you have to kind of like navigate and try to see what they actually want to hear. Like CFO might want to hear completely something else versus, let's say, head of whatever, right? Um, and the great BDR is treated as a craft, as a kind of like it's not just like, oh, dials nodes, there's a whole craft behind it. Walk me through, I guess, the methodologies, the descriptions of a great BDR, the ones that are, what do you think separates a great BDR from an average one?
Okay, that's a good question. I think there's some fundamentals that we can start with, and then I'll also talk a bit about how you develop yourself past the BDR, right? Assuming that you are using BDR as an entry into the sales world, but eventually you want to rise up the ranks and either be a sales leader or an account executive. With the fundamentals, I think if you're able to, like you say, custom tailor your outreach and conversations to multiple levels of the person that you're speaking to. So one might be what industry they're in. Another could be how senior are they? Because a CFO in, let's say, the fast moving consumer goods industry might care about something else than an operations person in the tech industry, right? But even within one company, depending on if you're an end user or a decision maker or the budget holder, you might be worried about different things. And like understanding that and understanding that there is no single silver bullet that everyone's going to resonate with is a good fundamental starting point. And you make a good point. It's not just about booking meetings, even though on paper, that is our entire job. You have a name, you have a number next to your name, there's a whole leaderboard, scoreboard thing, and you got to hit that number every month. If you didn't hit that number, you kind of suck and you might be managed out, right? However, just because someone is crushing that number doesn't make them necessarily a good salesperson. They might be a sick BDR, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be a good AE. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have two people. You have one person who doubles their quota every month, but all they do is focus on booking meetings. And once they book the meeting, they hand it over to their level 2 salesperson. In our organization, it's an AE, might be called something else in different companies. The second person, they let's say they hit their quota in the first 2 weeks of the month, in the first half of the month. But then what they do is they focus the second half of their month on like learning additional skills. So maybe they set up time with that level 2 salesperson or the leader, trying to understand what will my job actually look like once I get promoted? What kinds of skills do I need to develop to hit the ground running? Let's say person 1 and 2 get promoted in the same cycle. Even though person 1 on paper is twice as good of a BDR as the other person, I think the second person will be more successful in the long run.
Because of the essentially well-rounded learning that goes into.
Yes, and because it's different skill sets. right? Like if you're a BDR, you're focusing on getting people into the shop. Let's say, hey, we have an orange store. Come check out these fresh, tasty oranges. But if you only ever do that and you never go deeper into the conversation, you don't know what it takes to close a deal, all the different decision makers, right? What it takes to, this silly analogy, sell the orange. Then once you actually get promoted to an AE, you won't know what to do as step 2, 3, or 4.
No, you're so right. And BDR is a very much sort of a feeder position into so many senior positions, right? From AE, you can be customer facing, growth roles, um, really any position, because it teaches you a lot of things, not just skill wise, as you said, but also like the mental resilience wise, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Very quickly though, before I move on to my next question, I'm just curious about your thoughts in terms of what a good cold call is. You know, let's say you don't have many engagements, you don't have many kind of signals. You know, you don't really have much of an in, and it's very much a cold call. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think a good anatomy, a good structure of that kind of a cold call is?
I think if all of those criteria are met, so you don't have any signals, you don't really know if they're interested, if you have no information on them and their company, at least you can try to find similar customers in that space. Let's say this is I don't know, a drinks company, right? If you have Coca-Cola or Pepsi in your portfolio, maybe you can start the call being like, hey, we work with this competitor of yours. I saw your role. I assume this is your scope. Is this something you're interested in? If they say no, that's fine. It's their loss. You move on. I wouldn't overinvest sort of your time into something where there is no signal. But usually, more often than not, at least that FOMO aspect of, hey, your competitor has made this decision and they have, without rambling too much, maybe drop one benchmark, like maybe they cut their reporting time down from 4 weeks to 2 days. If they're not interested, frankly, I'm not sure if I'm interested in continuing the conversation, because that
Mm.
kind of tells me as well that maybe they're mentally not ready for AI. Maybe they're not, they're too risk averse or too conservative to make that decision. Maybe they're just the wrong person to speak to. But
The-
maybe they'll just say something like, oh, we already use XYZ, right? We already have this in-house solution. As soon as they say something like that, then you can sort of dig in with a
mm.
good sort of objection handling skill set, which I think is very important to build up on.
But you're saying if they're sort of hostile from the get go, you're not going to get much into the conversation, essentially, right?
No, I actually prefer hostile. Hostile's fine. I can work with hostile. I can't work with just no energy. If it's negative energy, you can still challenge them, right? If they say, we already have this sorted, it's like, oh, great. You already solved this problem. Is it this thing that you're using? And if they go, yes, it is. It's like, oh, funny you say that. Your competitor said the same thing, but they still managed to improve everything by 5x. Now you're in a conversation, right? If they just go, mate, I don't care about this, like, I'll just give you one of those, that's
Yeah,
worse.
that's good to move on. When you are doing outbound all day, you get very raw signals from the market, from the people, from what's going through their minds, right? Because it's not just what you see on the news; it's very much you're talking to the people in the space, in the field. Um, in your opinion, what subtle signs tell you whether a product actually has traction versus you're just kind of forcing the product onto the market?
I think industry is one, industry trends is one. So if there are similar companies that have solved that problem, that's a really strong one. Another signal I would consider very strong is if multiple level at different levels of hierarchy in the company express interest. That's also very powerful, because to get a deal moving, not only do you need end users to, in this case, like end users to moan about their financial planning platform, you also need to have senior people who care about this problem because it's maybe affecting their speed to decision making, because they keep having to wait for like analysts to give them the newest spreadsheet, right? So multi-level sort of hierarchical interest, industry trends is powerful. And honestly, the most powerful signal that is marketing engagements. Have they been to one of our events? Have they been to any conferences on this topic? Have they engaged with our webinars? If any of those are true, you should very likely be able to have a decent conversation with them because they're clearly interested.
That's true. That's
You
very
just
much
ask
true.
them, why did you do this? Like, why did
Yeah,
you come to this event? What were you
yeah,
hoping to learn? Did you like what
yeah.
you see? Do you want to find out more?
Sure, sure. Yeah. But regardless of what you have, whatever kind of engagement, cold outreach is still very much difficult. It's very notoriously difficult thing. Um, and what patterns you've noticed in yourself, in your workflows, or in some others that consistently get people to respond?
FOMO, for sure. And that's that psychological thing that I was talking about. If you basically go in and start going like, hey, like this is Jimmy calling from Pigment. We're an AI powered financial planning platform. You're getting hung up on immediately, right? But if you kind of go, hey, Mr. I don't know, Fanta or whatever, we work with Coca-Cola. Weird example because Coca-Cola owns Fanta, but you know where I'm going with this. Or let's say Red Bull. Hey, Mr. Red Bull, we work with Coca-Cola. Are you interested? Like, you don't even have to say too much. You just go, hey, we work with Coca-Cola and improve their financial planning. I saw your role and thought this would be interesting to you. Is it? Right? Um, that I think is the most powerful one. Or you go, hey, we recently had like a global summit on, let's say, financial planning, and we had loads of leaders across the industry attend. It's a shame you couldn't make it. You know, we tried to invite you, but if this is something you're interested in, I'd love to show you what you missed out on.
So that creating that feeling of, oh, I'm missing out is very much one of the ways to get their kind of enthusiasm, right? Um, One thing you mentioned, which is very important, I think, and it's not emphasized enough, it's not just kind of doing messaging or just like the volume, but also finding the right customer profile, also finding the right persona. And what's your thinking on that? Because I feel like from company to company, from size to size, from industry to industry, it can change dramatically.
Yeah, you have to be careful with ICPs because not only do you want to make sure that you maximize your chances of success, you also want to minimize the chances of you wasting your time. You can probably speak to like an end user, like a foot soldier person for 60 minutes and they'll moan about everything that's wrong with the company and everything wrong that's, you know, with their tools in house. But then you speak to the CFO and he's like, well, we don't have budget. So it is what it is, you know, deal with it. So that's one thing. Well, and I don't want to encourage people from speaking to end users because you can also take those pain points to the CFO. Whether or not they care is another question. I think good research is always more important than messaging, right? If you speak to the right person, let's say the decision maker, someone who oversees strategic decisions or decides what tools they use in house, right? Maybe someone who's quite into AI in the first place. Maybe you see something on their LinkedIn like, oh, I'm into AI, or you know, some posts about it. It doesn't matter too much whether or not you hit the right buzzwords or whatever. If you just talk to them, hey, saw you're interested in AI, we work with your competitors. What's up?
Sure, sure. Jimmy, obviously, gotta address the elephant in the room, which is the mental aspect of the BDR job. It is actually probably one of the best jobs to toughen up. You know, um, doing outbound every day means you're gonna face the most amount of rejection you've ever faced in your goddamn life. Um, how do you deal with that mentally and manage to stay consistent and motivated and just come in the next day and go after it again?
Yeah, it's savage, man. I think, yeah, it's really tough. I think coming from consulting, I wanted that, right? Like I said earlier, I wanted that rejection therapy to see what it feels like to have someone tell you to F off like 50 times a day, making 100 dials, all of those things. I think that it's important to keep in mind. There's two things I would say that help me kind of overcome the toughness of it. Firstly, is remembering why you did it, right? So for me, for example, I just thought if I can unlock the skill of cold calling and I can convince someone who doesn't want to talk to me or thinks I'm like interrupting their lunch break, if I can convince them to jump on a meeting to me and ultimately give me like a loads of money for a product that they didn't even know existed 30 minutes ago, if I can have that conversation, then any subsequent conversation that I have in my career, any job interview, any fundraising round, or maybe a promotional conversation will be a walk in the park. That's one. Remember why you did it in the first place. Actually, I'll add a third thing. The second thing will be gamify it, right? You have to remove your ego from it. You can't let it affect you. Just because someone hangs up on you does not mean that you're a bad person, doesn't mean that you're worthless or anything like that. I think it's easy to fall into that mental trap because, like I say, you have a name and a number next to it. So naturally, you're going to be sort of evaluating yourself based on your performance metrics. But there's so much that goes into it that's outside of your control. There's timing, there's like luck, there's simply just maybe you caught the person on the wrong foot. Maybe they had a shitty week and they don't want to talk to you. That's fine, right? I think the third one is just like a healthy dose of gaslighting yourself. If someone hangs up on you and says like, "Hey, I'm just not interested," or they're like unnecessarily rude about it, instead of thinking you're a loser, just tell yourself they're a loser for not listening to you, right? Like I would always tell myself, "Oh, like if someone's really rude and hangs up on me, I'd sometimes like look over to the side and just go, yeah, this loser isn't ready for Pigment. Like they're mentally not ready yet for these amazing AI features. Whether that's true or not, it's up to you to decide. But if it helps you sleep at night, protect your, protect your ego, then I think that's worth considering.
Very much sure, Jerry. And you're a master at it. You're good at it. Um, but now you're making a transition into the deployment strategist role, which kind of covers and as you said, like BDR is a fantastic position to branch into different roles. And deployment strategies, in a way I understand it, is sort of like the full kind of GTM chain, value chain, right from the beginning to the end, kind of. What made you interested in moving from this, the outbound role and more kind of BDR business development role to into implementation and deployment side of things?
Mm. So 2 months ago, I didn't really know. No, I didn't know what deployment was. I had never heard of that before, right? And I think that throughout my time at Pigment, I was kind of eyeing up what's next. So when I ultimately came across Scope, right, and I spoke to them, not only was I really interested in their product and the team, but the role of deployment strategist quite intrigued me because it seemed like the perfect combination of skills that you need that just happened to align with both my BDR background at Pigment, but also my consulting background at ZS. So like you say, you're starting right from the pilot project stage. You are the owner of an account. So that's kind of similar to key account management or account executive in our case. You're owning this account, which means you oversee the pilot, you identify the success metrics, and you're speaking to all the senior stakeholders. Once that's over, not only do you have to demo the product, make sure that everything in the product is sort of tailored to their needs, you also have to close the contract, make sure the client's happy, and then identify cross-selling opportunities. These three things, demoing, closing, and cross-selling, those would be three different people that do that. Whereas in deployment, that's all on you, right? And I feel like that overwhelming amount of like an enlargement of scope, no pun intended, was quite exciting to me.
And I guess, now that you're stepping into your new role and you've spoken to so many prospects as a BDR, but now you're owning the full value chain, what are you most excited to learn now that customers actually use the product for sales, right? Like you're owning the full value chain.
I think what quite excites me and something that I look forward to, which is also something that you don't get to see in consulting unless you're a senior partner, and you don't get to see in tech sales unless you're an account executive or customer success, is the actual impact that you have on the client, which sounds cliche, but I'll explain what I mean by that. In consulting, you have these 3 monthly projects, right? You try to learn everything about your client, you give them a couple of strategic recommendations, maybe you help implement something. Then you drop it and you move on. You're probably never going to speak to that person again in most consulting models because you'll work with different clients across different practice areas. As a BDR, it's quite similar. You bring the people into the shop, and as soon as they're interested, you hand them on to the AE who will then close the deal. So whether or not your recommendation, the tool that you help them purchase or anything like that actually helped them and actually made their lives any easier is not necessarily like, that doesn't necessarily reach you. You don't get to hear those things, right? I think at the end of the day, we're dealing with people. We're building up personal connections in these quite intense bursts of time. I think what would be really nice is speaking to someone that you remember, hey, like a year ago, we did this pilot project together, and look at this now. Like you've rolled out our tool across all of your business units. All of your end users are really happy. Sure, we had some barriers, but you know, they tell you something like, oh, you've really, changed the way we work, you've really increased our efficiency. I think that's really motivating. And I really look forward to being able to experience that.
Do you think spending time in outbound is sales first makes someone better at roles like deployment and product and strategy later on?
For sure. Yeah. I think, like I said earlier, the sales skill itself is fundamental to every conversation you have, not only in your career, but even your personal life. I also think that the fundamental skills that you develop in sales, let's say pitching, how to sell a value proposition, understanding customer needs, those things aren't isolated to sales. They're also important in things like consulting.
Jimmy, would you ever want to do something of your own?
Never say never. I think at this point in time, I'm very happy to join someone else's stream for the time being. I'm not ruling it out, but I've always, how do I say this? I think my risk appetite stretches maybe to just before founder. And like I say, I'm not ruling it out, but I feel like I have no problems with joining an existing startup, even if it's early stage pre-series A like scope. But setting the whole thing up just seems like a lot.
Mm. This is a very candid and honest perspective, which I really very much appreciate. And Jimmy, we are coming towards the end of our episode, and I think there's quite a few people as that would be in your position perhaps now, or even at the very beginning of their career, kind of steps. What would you advise to them? What do you think they should develop? What they should work on in this world that's being increasingly changed and reshaped by AI? What do you think people should emphasize?
Scan the market, keep looking. Don't just go on autopilot. I think the days where your career is going to be at the same company for 20, 25 years, those days are over, right? Most people that I speak to who are holding really impressive job titles or who've had really diverse and crazy careers, they all say that you have to pivot, right? I'm not saying be a serial pivoter. Like, don't just spend 1 year at each company because that's going to look terrible and no one's going to trust you. But I'm saying if there is an exciting opportunity, you should take it. I think that in order to make that decision, you then need to go out of your way to seek out those opportunities. I'm very privileged and lucky that Pigment reached out to me because I would have never scanned the sort of AI EPM market on my own. But maybe I should have. Maybe I should have done that because one of my main regrets with Pigment is that I didn't join them 3-4 years earlier when they were Series A, when they weren't 500 people big. Because I think that sense of pride of like, imagine you're one of the first 10 people and 5 years later, you're at a company offsite with 500, 1,000 people. You've hit like 1 billion ARR. Imagine that feeling of, being one of the founding members. That's something that I hope to be able to achieve with Scope. It's something that without a time machine, I sadly can't achieve with Pigment. But I think that's a really cool feeling. And I think people should chase it.
That's very refreshing to hear, Jimmy. And I guess my final question would be, what drives you?
Ooh. What, in my career or?
In general, you are a very ambitious, driven person. You are obviously moving. You moved into Pigment because you were ambitious. You were moving to Scope because you're ambitious. I'm curious, what's the driving force? What's the motivating force behind it?
I honestly don't think it's that crazy, to be honest. I think my motto in life, if I had to call it a motto, is just I have two main objectives. Let's say that my two main objectives are have fun and make enough money to provide for your family. I'm not trying to be a billionaire, right? I would like to have somewhat of a work-life balance. I would like to make enough money in my late 20s, early 30s so that I can provide a certain life for my family, but also not be so drowning in work that I can't spend time with my children. I think that's quite important to me. And ultimately have fun. This is something that you spend most of your life doing. If your job really sucks, maybe you should do something else. And I think the BDR job has been really fun. It's been really intense. Don't get me wrong. There's definitely crappy days and good days. But at the end of the day, I always feel like we're just playing a big game, right? Every time I refresh the leaderboard, it's just like, oh, who's leading? What can I do to maybe catch up? It's nice.
Jimmy, it was a very nice conversation, and I very much value your thinking and your insights and your perspectives. So thank you for making time for this on a Sunday night. Um, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you, talking to you, and I cannot wait to hear more good success stories coming your way, especially that you're the new startup.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for having me. Long time fan. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in real life.
So, brother, take care of yourself.
Okay.